Good evening, and welcome to the Albright Scholar for November 2018. My name is John Pankratz. I teach history at Albright, and each month it's my privilege to welcome BCTV viewers and residents of Greater Reading to take a glimpse inside our learning community up here on North 13th Street, to look at the work being done by teachers and students, and to think about its impact on all of us. It being November and Veterans Day, I would like to wish you a very meaningful Veterans Day, and as a historian, I certainly think of the 100-year anniversary of the end of the First World War. We're going to be talking about politics tonight with one of my very favorite colleagues, Dr. Michael Armato, Assistant Professor of Political Science, here in the building right next door to the BCTV studios. And one of our younger faculty members, but already somebody who has worked himself into the fabric of our institution, both in the curriculum and co-curricularly.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Michael, you're a political scientist, and we're going to talk about your own research, but we'll also talk a little bit about the relationship between the science of politics and the analysis of electoral behavior. And we remember an election happening just last week, so we might get your insights as an expert there. We had you on just a little over 2 years ago, talking a bit about the election of 2016, before it happened, before it blew some of the models and surprised us. But you've, for some time now, had a book project going on and doing research. Tell us a little bit about what you're working on.
Thank you very much, John. So I'm right now working on a book project studying progressive political elites in the Hudson Valley of New York.
Okay.
That
entire area north of New York City running up to Albany.
Right, so it's Albany, Rensselaer, all the way down to Rockland and Westchester and everywhere in between. So those are 10 counties. Yeah. The most interesting thing about the Hudson Valley is that it is an electorally competitive region. Mm-hmm. Both Democrats and Republicans and third parties that are both conservative and progressive are actively engaged in local politics.
That's kind of exciting, because if you look at the map of the United States as a whole, there are some areas that are deep red and deep blue and not necessarily close to each other.
Right, the Hudson Valley is largely purple. There are some bluer counties, there are some redder counties, but when you look on a more macro level at either presidential election results or congressional districts, it's really hard to say that there's one party with a monopoly on everything. For example, in 2016, 6 counties were won by Hillary Clinton, and 4 counties were won by President Trump. And a lot of the counties were extremely close. Some of them weren't, but most of them were. So both parties have to work very hard. Interestingly enough,
and they have an incentive to work hard.
They do. They've got to work for votes, and that's refreshing in a lot of ways, because you tend to think of New York as just this deep blue state,
right?
But there are parts, certainly north of the city, that are not. And you really, really, really have to work hard. And they do work hard. And there are people on both sides of the aisle who are just passionate about being politically active. And
maybe some groups who are not even on the aisle.
Right, who are politically active. Yeah. New York's interesting because of their long tradition of third parties.
Yes.
Indeed, there will be other new third parties after last week. Some parties gained ballot status in New York for the first time ever, including the Libertarians. They finally broke 50,000. And then there's parties like the Independence Party, who you never know which way they're going to go. But they tend to endorse either a Democrat or a Republican, depending on where they are. But all the congressional seats, or most of the congressional seats, had very competitive races. And that's really quite refreshing to see. So this project started at the 2006 Ulster County Fair, which is quite some time ago, as our students would think about it.
Yeah. Which is the city in Ulster County?
This was in New Paltz, but it was the county fair, and I go every time I could possibly go to the Ulster County Fair for my love of fried foods, if nothing else. And while I was there, and this is just the summer before I started graduate school, so I was still very active in politics at the time,
Right.
but I wasn't as active in the academic side of things. And someone came up and asked me to sign a petition to get on, for the Green Party slate of candidates to get on the statewide ballot. And I was like, oh, this is happening at the county fair. This is strange. And then I thought about it some more, and I started being a social science observer, if you will.
Great.
I'm looking around and saying, oh, there's the Republican table over there, the Democratic table over there. And then you really started to see people who started wearing campaign buttons and seeing this interesting dichotomy of people on the left and people on the right happily coexisting together at the Ulster
Enjoying
County
the fair.
Enjoying the fair, pushing their candidates, but not in some obnoxious way.
Right.
And then, you know, as I'm looking, several years prior to this, the Green Party did have permanent ballot status for a short period of time. And there were hotly contested Green Party primaries in Ulster County for state committee seats, which is something you tend not to see.
Right.
So, because most people don't even know what state committees do, even though we have an active group of that in Pennsylvania. So I thought, wow, this really was not a bad place to get petitions, considering if you're looking to get on the ballot. So, fast forward, I go to grad school. I change my research agenda accordingly. Then I finish my dissertation. I say, I want to do this project. And SUNY Press loved the project and granted me a contract. And this summer, I interviewed 29 activists in the region. I guess my long-term goal is after I'm done with this project, maybe I'll write one on conservatives on the Hudson Valley and then do this book called Ideology on the Hudson Valley and really bringing both groups together. So we'll see how that turns out. I have to get through the first book first.
Yeah.
But
Is this going to be? Is this a region that, in some ways, might give some lessons to the rest of the country? The fact that politics are sort of evenly matched and highly competitive, and you have groups talking with each other and trying to understand each other in some sense.
It's a good cross section of the country because you have cities, real cities. You've got suburbia mixed in, and then you've got rural areas, and then some of the semi-rural stuff going on. So it's really a good cross section of the. A good cross section of what the nation would look like,
Right.
Especially because you're not seeing people winning with 70% of the vote on either side usually. So that's what's helpful. The other thing is you've got people who have really divergent views living in the same county.
Yeah.
And that's really good to see because, you know, you get to really say, okay, what's going on in this place at this time? And then you can really chart differences. Like, well, why all of a sudden are our votes changing this way? And what's that a result of? And then, okay, they swing back and they go back and forth.
Because I think there are some areas of the country that are either so blue or so red that in some ways there's not necessarily that much reflection. It's sort of an automatic thing.
Right. And it's good to see the areas purple because you really get to see what's going on. And this time around, with this particular election, the Democrats won every single one of those congressional districts. Not by a lot in some instances.
Okay.
I mean...
And how many of those were flips?
There was only one flip.
Okay.
But the other seats were not really necessarily always safe seats. So the big one was New York 19 that flipped. And I told all my classes, I said, if New York 19 flips, it's likely the Democrats will have a majority in the House. And I didn't think New York 19 was going to flip. I used to live in the district. I spent a lot of time in the district, not just doing research, but actually being a resident of the district. And it's a very tough district to represent because it's a geographically gigantic district. That's not just including the Hudson Valley, but includes parts of the Mohawk Valley. So it's a really wide area. So it was a super expensive race. There was a huge Democratic primary where like 7 or 8 people were running, spending excuse me, millions of dollars. And then in the final numbers, I have some numbers. This is from 1017 to 1025. This is FEC data. The Democrats spent $2.3 million and the Republicans spent $1.1 million. And that's just like a 2-week period. That's not the whole thing. I think the Democrat raised about over $7 million. And you have to understand that includes a very competitive primary. And the Republican raised over $3 million in the race. So for that area, which is partially in the New York media market, partially not, those are big numbers.
Yeah.
Other interesting thing about that race is there were 3 left of center candidates running, and I think the Democrat won with about 50.2% of the vote. So it wasn't a big chunk, but the other candidates took some votes too. So it wasn't huge, but it wasn't supposed to be huge. That district was always supposed to be a swing district, and it certainly was.
Right.
So you could really see what's going on from that particular district.
So if you owned a television station anywhere nearby, it was a good year. I think about the Philadelphia stations and having both New Jersey and the Pennsylvania races, many of which were hotly contested. It was hard to watch Jeopardy without seeing 7 ads for congressional candidates.
I found this interesting because I've watched very little TV, and I watched usually the Discovery Channel, National Geographic, and there really are no political ads on those channels. But we were still getting mail after we moved here from New York. My wife was getting all this mail in the election in New York, even though she is a registered voter here. So I was like, I can't believe there's more mail. But there it was. So there was a boatload of money spent, not just by the candidates, but by outside groups.
So what's your take as a, let me clarify something else. You're a political scientist and informed and expert. You're also an American citizen and a voter with your own values and preferences. I face this in the classroom as well, not to necessarily tip my political hand completely and try to maintain some sort of dialogue. How does a political scientist do that in Political Science 101 or something like that?
We do the best that we can.
Okay.
We try to talk about the facts, and the facts are not a debate. We don't debate facts. A fact is a fact, and then you try to call something as it is. And if something is one way, you just say that. If you think one party doesn't have a message about an issue, you say that, and you try to respect all sides. And we do the best that we can. Yeah. Under those circumstances.
When I talk about the history of politics, I say it's a little bit like the history of baseball. You can go a long way back into the 19th century and discover that it's the same game being played according to many of the same rules, and much of the same analysis can be applied to it. I guess the only difference is a current election is a game between teams you care about, and one in the 19th century. Maybe not so much. What kind of election did we just see in this midterm?
It's a good question. The Democrats picked up north of 30 House seats.
Yep.
Apparently, they actually, and I haven't seen final numbers because there are no final numbers yet. It seems they picked up more seats in this House contest than they did in 2006 when they took over the House the last time.
Okay.
A lot of those seats were not by large margins at all, but some of the results were quite surprising. I did not think I would see South Carolina have a Democratic pickup, or Oklahoma have a Democratic pickup. I also expected Democrats to do better in California than they did.
Okay.
They might have a pickup of 4. I was seeing something like a pickup of 6 to 10. So Minnesota, the Democrats picked up 2 seats, the Republicans picked up 2 seats. So it sort of canceled each other out. So what kind of an election was it? It's hard to say, but in the House, the Democrats did well. In the Senate, it's a murkier picture. Right now, it looks like the Republicans gained 4 seats and lost 2 seats. So it would be a net gain of 2. Not a bad night for them. So was it a wave election? I don't know. I think it's more wavier than not.
Okay.
And the Democrats also picked up 7 governorships.
Yes,
So,
and that was interesting.
so-
Some big names in the Republican Party.
including things that I didn't think I would see. So could they have done better? Certainly they could have done better. But they had it. I think they had a good night overall. One of the things that I was looking at was who's spending the money. Because
Right.
if we're coming back to political science, we'll look at who's spending the money, what's turnout, is there a realignment? Because those are the big things that we're interested in. And typically, it's not when the challenger's spending money that you think there's going to be a flip. It's when the incumbent's spending money that you think they're in trouble.
Right.
And I just quickly looked at 5 House seats that 4 of which definitely flipped, and 1 of which is probably going to flip. There's still absentees out. And in every one of these instances, again, between 1017 and 1025, and we don't have final numbers yet.
Yeah, we should point out that this show is very current because
Right.
we're still counting in many places.
Right, exactly. The Democratic challenger outspent the Republican incumbent by a lot. So that makes me sit here and say, well, maybe we need to change that line of thinking. And I was taught campaign finance by the executive director of the Campaign Finance Institute. So this is someone who knows campaign finance. So if he said that, then that's absolutely was true at the time. So that's one thing, is really looking at the money.
Right.
And the other thing is, of course, we have to consider that independent spending plays a big role.
Okay. Well, wonder of wonders, we have a home viewer. What's your question? Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Very well.
Something that you, the moderator, said piqued my interest, and that was, how does someone, a political science teacher, professor, maintain neutrality? And you had said, I know I try to do that. I don't know what your expertise is. But then the political science prof said, well, I try and maintain my neutrality, but if I think that one side doesn't have a valid point, I let my students know that. Well, by doing that, you are influencing your students. You are no longer neutral. You are influencing them. And I spent 35 years in the field of education, as well as going all through college, including the doctorate. So I've been exposed to the very subtle nuances of a prof who wants you to go one way or the other regarding whatever subject there is, and others who are very neutral. And I think if you do what you said, that you are telling your students that you feel they have the right to know, that if one side doesn't have a valid point regarding an issue, it is your duty to tell them. Then you're no longer neutral. Do you see my point?
I see what you're saying. I think what might have said was that when either side makes an argument that isn't supported by the facts, that you could mention that.
I don't think he said either.
Well, he didn't say that, but I think maybe that's what I thought he meant.
Well, and that's what he may well have meant. But just maybe a couple of moments before that, when he was given the results of what I'm presuming is upstate New York's congressional districts, and that the Democrats won overwhelmingly, and you threw in a little subtlety, and that's good.
Oh, okay. So,
yeah. So I as a prof, I'm now have grandkids in college, and I really would want profs to remain as neutral as they can regarding this subject. If in art a student doesn't like Van Gogh, then don't try and bend their elbow in there and get them in a hammerlock to convince them that they really should like Van Gogh because you like Van Gogh.
okay, so my biggest point, I suppose, is that there are facts and there are not facts, and I correct facts if something is factually wrong. on
But where are
both
you getting
sides.
your facts from?
Well, I'm getting my facts from one.
Tell me your sources.
Well, it depends on the situation. I certainly have a PhD in political science, so I have a lot of literature. So, yeah, that's where I'm getting my sources from, are data-driven, academically peer-reviewed sources.
But would you agree, Professor, that depending upon the source, the data will be skewed? For instance, the data that you will get from MSNBC will differ widely from the data you will get from Fox News.
I think we'd agree to that, but that's not what Michael was saying. He's talking about academically peer-reviewed sources.
Yeah, I know what Michael was saying, but that's what happens, depending upon the source or sources. And if a right-wing person is only getting their information from a right-wing bubble, their viewpoint will be skewed. If a left-wing leaning person is only getting it from CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, then their viewpoints will be skewed. And then if you go on the internet, you've got to watch your sources there. Well, I've occupied enough of your time, fellas, so I thank you for bearing with me. But I just wanted to point out that you, in very subtle ways, can influence your students, and they want to please you. And they will parrot you in order to get the grade that they want.
Yeah, I don't think either of us, thank you though for your comment and your insight. I don't think either of us wants students to parrot us. I think critical awareness and ability to know one's own interests and values is the more important goal.
So it's important to remember that political science is not just what's going on in current elections.
Right.
We spend most of our time talking about the literature, talking about the nuts and bolts of government. So I try my best, we all try our best to be neutral in the classroom, and it's important that we give both sides the time to speak in a respectful manner, and we try to do that the best we can. Again, though, it's not just a matter of talking about current events all the time.
It really isn't. I mean, the analogy, I guess, might be sports. It's possible for us in the classroom to talk about football without revealing a particular team loyalty, simply because there's a game that you can talk about, its movements, its trajectory, without saying "Yay Eagles" or something else. Yeah. I think we're almost down to our last minute here. Michael, you don't want to hazard any predictions for 2020, do you?
Certainly not.
No.
The biggest prediction would be that it's very hard to take out an incumbent president.
Yes.
So you should not really read too much into 2020 from 2016 because the voter turnout rates are entirely different. So you shouldn't think just because the Democrats won a lot of seats in the House that means President Trump is not going to get reelected, because that's not the way history works.
Right. Was it a high turnout for a midterm election?
It was a high turnout for a midterm. So the midterm election turnout right now is of the voting eligible population is about 49.2%. In 2014, it was 36.7%. In 2010, it was 41.8%. So high by the midterm average, not as high as
as high as a presidential election.
The last one was about 60%. So
right. Great. Well, I guess that means that we're going to have you on in a future edition of the show. And best of luck with the completion of your book manuscript and research and everything. And
that's good.
We'll look forward to seeing you on campus as well.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to seeing you again and perhaps hearing from you in the next edition of The Albright Scholar. Good night.